To Bangladesh next, where violence has escalated. The number of people killed in clashes between protesters and police has reached at least 39. Internet services are down across most of the country after protesters set fire to the headquarters of the main state broadcaster. Hundreds have been injured as police fired rubber bullets and tear gas to disperse the protesting students. They are angry about the reintroduction of a quota system that reserves a third of government jobs for families of veterans who fought in the 1971 War of Independence. And Amnesty International is reporting that Bangladeshi police used, quote, unlawful force against protesters. To go deeper on that issue, I'm now joined by Takbir Huda. He's the regional researcher for South Asia at Amnesty International. Mr. Huda, welcome. First of all, what does unlawful force mean? I mean, what kind of measures and treatments, actions are we talking about?
Right, thank you. So by unlawful force, we are really guided by international legal instruments, such as basic principles on the use of force and firearms by law enforcement officials that was published by the UN in 1990. So this chiefly looks at three basic principles when assessing whether or not the use of force has been lawful, such as legality, necessity, and proportionality. So the question always is, was there a legal, a lawful objective that the law enforcement agency was seeking to achieve with the use of force? Was the use of force necessary, or could it have been resolved through non-violent means? And finally, if use of force is in fact needed, it must be proportionate to the seriousness of the offense and it must and also the objective. So this is the kind of measurement we apply when looking at the use of force. And by our assessment, the use of force that we witnessed earlier this week, which is when we did the analysis, was in fact unlawful.
And how did you verify this misconduct of police forces?
Right. So we do so by triangulating human intelligence and open source information and also geospatial intelligence. So we collected witness, accounts, eyewitness and victims with accounts from the ground over telephone calls. And also then we looked at, the information that was available on the internet and from media houses. And then we analyzed with the assistance of our Citizens Evidence Lab at Amnesty, the video and photographic evidence that our partners on the ground were sharing with us. So from this, we were able to ascertain that the use of force was unlawful. And we, analyzed in particular the shooting of Abu Saeed, the first student who was known to be killed on, 15th July. So that day, sorry, on 16th July. So that, you can see that two officers were, discharging 12-gauge shotguns at him. And we assessed that through geospatial intelligence that the distance between them was 15 meters. And Abu Saeed was not posing any threat to the officers at that time or anyone around him. So we got a forensic analyst to look at the chest wounds and it was consistent with birdshot. Now, we consider the use of birdshot, which is a hunting weapon, to be completely inappropriate in the use of policing protests.
Your findings also point to a student group affiliated to the ruling Awami League attacking students protesting against these quotas. Why is this group, the Bangladesh Chhatro League, attacking other students?
Yes, the witnesses that we spoke to categorically alleged that the people who were attacking them were the, Bangladesh Chhatro League, the student party affiliated with the ruling party. And then, we've seen this pattern in the past where they have, attempted to crush student protests and other popular uprisings. So, but this time what was different is that they seem to have really targeted the women and girls. So we had women and girls who told us we thought they would spare us, that they wouldn't, attack us. But in fact, they seem to have attacked them with a particular vengeance, launching, punches and kicks, they said, on their breasts, backs, and stomachs. So, it was really an attempt, I think, diminish the participation of women in these protests as well, because we've seen an incredible involvement of young girls and female students in these protests in a country which is largely conservative, where, the visibility of women in public spaces is often very difficult to find. So that is something different that we've seen, but the overarching, objective remains to crush popular uprising within student spaces.
The government is also raiding the headquarters of the opposition Bangladesh Nationalist Party. Why does the government need to do this? Is it using these protests as a pretext to target the opposition?
I don't think it needs to use the students as a pretext to target the opposition, because even our analysis from last year in the months leading up to the election, particularly the July 2023 protests that the opposition party held, was met with equal unlawful use of force. And we've also used evidence to analyze that the use of force was unlawful, such as the use of tear gas in front of hospital, which affected women and children. So I think what's in fact happening is that there has been a attempt to delegitimize the student protest, saying that it is driven by opposition or a vested interest quarter groups. But the students, I would say, have been very categorical, and they're not swayed by any interest groups. They've been very clear about what their interests are, what their demands are. They were largely peaceful before the Chhatra League attacked them.
We'll leave it there for the moment. Takbir Huda from Amnesty International, thanks so much.
Michael Kugelman directs the South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center, a global affairs think tank. I asked him if he was surprised that the protests turned so violent.
I am, just because we have not seen many protests like this in Bangladesh for a number of years. One reason for that is that the government of Sheikh Hasina has cracked down hard on critics, on dissent, on opposition. So there hasn't been a capacity to mobilize. But what's happened in this case are that students who have commonly been protesters over Bangladesh's history, peaceful protesters, they have been so inspired to stage these protests, and I think that they have been further inspired and energized by some of the initial responses coming from the Bangladesh government, which have not been very de-escalatory steps at all. And that's one reason why we're seeing the protest escalate over the last few days.
So who is behind the violence? Are all the students involved?
Well, these are largely peaceful protests. There have been reports that some students have been wielding sticks and things like that. However, the government responded to the protests with tear gas and the use of force. And this is a common tactic that we've seen in Bangladesh. Frequently, protests, including peaceful protests, are met with significant crackdowns. So I think that it's not a coincidence that we started to see the death toll rise after the state responded with the use of force to try to suppress the demonstrations. Clearly, that has not been successful, as the protests have simply intensified.
Can you explain in more detail this quota system and why young people especially are upset with it?
Right. So this quota system is something that had actually not been in place in Bangladesh, but there were court rulings in recent weeks that essentially reinstated a series of job quotas in the civil service in Bangladesh. And the reason why they're so controversial is that some of these quotas allot jobs to those that are related to people who participated in Bangladesh's liberation fight, those that had participated in the independence fight in 1971. So that means that if you happen not to be related to those that had fought in the liberation war, you're not eligible for these jobs. And in a country where 2/3 of the population is of working age, but in many cases struggles to find jobs, it's very demoralizing and upsetting when you discover that a number of jobs will not be available or accessible to you. The other issue is that there is a partisan dimension at play here. It was the ruling party, the current ruling party, the Awami League, that led the liberation battle. So many that are critical of these quotas think that this is an effort on the part of the government to try to bring in partisans, supporters of the Awami League party, to take up slots across the civil service. Bottom line is that many of these young people protesting fear that the number of merit-based jobs in the civil service in Bangladesh will be depleted because of this, the reinstatement of these new quotas.